Hello and welcome to Discover Drawing Part 5. So today we're going to have a look at negative space and how that can help us to draw things which our logical left brain has a real problem with drawing. So if you have a look, first of all, I've got you a picture here of a chair, and the first thing to understand is what is negative space. So you've got negative and positive space. So negative space is the spaces in between an object. So the positive space is the actual object itself. So the straps on the chair, the seat pad, the legs, and the negative space are all these shapes in between, all these light areas. Okay, so we can have a look there. So that's, first of all, understanding the positive and the negative. And if I talk you through a drawing that I did back in 2015, okay, that's a drawing of a chair that you can see. Now this chair, I actually drew the entire chair. This was a challenge that I had to do on a course, and I drew the whole chair without actually ever drawing the chair. So I was only allowed to identify the spaces in between the chair. And if you remember last week, we looked at starting with a bit that interests you or something, rather than looking at the whole thing, which can sometimes seem a little bit complicated. It's a good idea to find something that you like or that you can identify. Now, the negative space that I decided to start this drawing at was a kind of a pixie boot. So I don't know, if I hold it closer, can any of you, this is obviously not the actual positive space of the chair, but in the negative spaces, can anybody see a pixie boot there? Okay, I'll just give you a chance to have a think. So where can you see a pixie boot in the spaces between the bits, the positive bits of the chair? And the answer is here. So I saw this negative shape here, like a pixie boot. And it was really, really easy to draw that pixie boot. The next thing that I noticed was that if I drew two lines up, so I drew a line up from the bottom of the pixie boot up here, and another line from the top of the pixie boot up, and then I noticed there was a semicircle of negative space in here. And so I drew the pixie boot, then I went up and I drew a semicircle. And from that I was then able to fill in and shade this seat back here, this positive bit. This bit underneath here, I saw parallelograms. So it was quite easy. We talked last week about using drawing like Lego, building blocks. So what I did here was, in my head, I thought, right, if I go to the toe of the pixie boot, and then that is the top left-hand corner of this parallelogram here. And so I drew the parallelogram there. And then I noticed that this bit here came down a little bit further. So I was able to come along the bottom of the parallelogram and just dip down a little bit and back up to draw this positive part of this leg here. Then moving over to this next bit, I spotted, can you see what shape that is? It's like a triangle, isn't it, with a slightly flat top, with a bit chopped off the top. So I just drew a triangle. It was really easy, and flattened the top. Then we had another parallelogram, but what was quite interesting is the top left-hand corner of the parallelogram just kind of went to a little point, and this side had a little curve. Then I noticed there was a little V shape here. So I drew, from the edge of the parallelogram, I drew in a little V shape. And then, before I knew it, I was able to just bring this up and round to meet back up with the top of my pixie boot. I was then able to look at where the lights and the shadows were, and there was this shape of dark, so all I did was shade in this shape dark. And if you notice, it's the first time I think I've ever drawn such a good chair, and I was really quite pleased. But what was interesting was your left brain, your logical left brain, says all four legs on a chair are the same height, otherwise your chair would wobble. So therefore, your left brain wants to put them all in a straight line. But when you actually look at this, the one at the back is higher up, this one comes lower down, this one comes lower down still. But I avoided all of that problem by just going pixie boot, semicircle, parallelogram, triangle, parallelogram, and I looked at where bit joined back up to the top of the pixie boot. From the toe of the pixie boot was the start of this parallelogram, and I built it up in shapes and then filled in the missing bit. And you can also see that I've done this sketch on a prepared graphite ground like we made last week. So that meant that I had my middle tone already, and I just had to add my darkest darks and rub out some lighter areas. So that was a chair that I drew without ever actually drawing a chair. So negative space is a way round these sort of symbolic pictures that we have. I mean, if I asked you to draw a chair quickly with your logical left brain, it certainly wouldn't look like that. So it helps you if you don't label anything and if you look for recognisable shapes instead. So I was thinking, how can I show you how this works? And I thought, well, what I will do is, that was one that I did which was fairly straightforward, but I thought, I wonder if I could challenge myself and put myself in your shoes a little bit. So I thought, right, what would I find really, really hard to draw? And I thought, a horse galloping. So I found a picture of a horse galloping. So we've got a picture of a horse galloping. And my first reaction is, oh my goodness, I couldn't ever draw that. That's way too complicated. I can't draw horses. But if you remember, we're not labelling anything. So that's not a horse today. That's just a shape. Okay? And what I'm going to do is the same, well, in fact, I've already done one thing. What I did was I thought I'm going to draw it with my left brain first. So the natural thing, logical thing is you've got a picture there of a horse and you're trying to copy that. You could be sitting in a field doing a sketch of a horse, or it could be you're working from a photograph like this one here. So I had a go, and I don't draw horses, I don't pretend I'm any good at drawing horses, and it was really interesting, the process that was going on in my brain as I drew it. And I can tell you, I got fed up really, really quickly. Okay, so there is my drawing of a horse, and it's really quite rubbish. And what happened was, oh, it's okay, I suppose, but what was interesting was I ran out of patience with it, and I started to speed up and get quicker and quicker, and I didn't bother with any detail. So this is looking at drawing using the positive image rather than the negative space around it. So pretty much my horse's head, and then the mane, I actually could feel myself stopping looking at the photograph of the horse and just going like this for the mane. Which actually, if you look back at my photograph, the horse's mane is actually much more interesting than that. But my logical left brain decided that I just wanted to get it done quickly. Remember, we talked last week about the fact that your left brain just wants to get the job done as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So it had a quick glance at the photograph, but then it decided it was just going to go like this for the mane. And for the tail, we all know horse's tail, so it just did some random lines. Let's actually have a look at the photograph of the tail of the horse. It's, again, much more interesting shapes than the one that my left brain let me draw. I then simplified all the hooves. They just became kind of outline shapes, whether they're like that on the photograph or not. And I tried to link things up, and you can see we talked last week about contour lines, so I put in a couple of lines just to kind of guide the eye to show the shape of the horse. Then I decided I was going to do the same negative space exercise that I did on this chair here. So I started, what I did was I actually had my iPad and I covered up the left brain horse so that I couldn't see it anymore, and I started a completely different kind of drawing. And it's by no means finished, but let me talk you through how I began. I started off by looking for shapes that I could recognise. And if I show you close up here, can you see here, there's a sort of a weird triangle with a little wonky bit and a point. So what I did was I drew the piece of land, then I drew this triangle here, then I also went to the top of the page and I drew this tiny little bit here, okay, between the ears. Then I decided there was a sort of a shape that went along and up here, and that gave me the shape for the top of the mane. And then I started to look at this triangle here, but notice the triangle doesn't go all the way to the land. So I drew up here, down the other side, in this little triangle here, and that will then lead to that hoof being up in the air and this one being lower down on the ground. And all the time I was trying to think, right, the top of this triangle, if you notice there, okay, because we'll stop talking about the horse now, we're just talking about shapes. So the top of that little triangle shape there, if you go directly up, then it takes you to the back of where the ears are. So you could actually, if you've put in that little negative space there and you come down to the top of the triangle, then draw the triangle. Then what I did was I went up and drew along these different shapes here. So let me just show you. I mean, it's not by any means a good drawing, and I'm still not great, and I don't, profess to be great at drawing horses, but it's got the potential to be a lot more interesting. And you can see here, there's my little triangle shape. And what I did as well was I moved around all over. So when I got bored, because don't forget your left brain is telling you, oh, hurry up, just quickly draw it. And so what it does, a way of getting around that is just to dot about. So I thought, right, I'll draw this triangle, and then I'll go up and I'll draw this shape here, and I'll see how that, and I built it up bit at a time, but I was concentrating on the negative spaces in between. And if I were to finish that drawing, it would take me probably, to do it properly like this, would probably take me about an hour or two. And I'd have to really sit, really look. And it's that patience that takes time, because a lot of us get fed up with drawing really quickly because we're frustrated because we can't do it. But that's your left brain telling you, just hurry up, you're overcomplicating things. And if you want to learn to draw well, you have to learn to become patient. But it's much easier to become patient drawing shapes, triangles, V shapes, a curve coming off the top here, go to the tip of the pixie boot and come down. It's like a puzzle. And so because you're working that all out, you kind of go into your right side of your brain, which is a very calm place. Well, that's actually not true. It's not calm necessarily, but it doesn't do timekeeping. Timekeeping is a left brain process. So when you're in your right brain, you can work, you can lose yourself. And it's a wonderful, wonderful feeling. And once you experience that, that's you beginning to understand what it's like to be in your right brain compared to your left brain mode. Think, for example, about watching a really, really good film or reading a really good book. Time just disappears. Think about when children are out playing and you're trying to call them in for tea and they're being creative and they're involved in creative game. They're just away in their own little world, and it's not they're being rude and they don't want to come in. They just don't connect and they lose track of time. And how many times have you lost track of time doing something that you're really enjoying, something creative, and time just vanishes? But that's because you're working in the right hand side mode of your brain, and it doesn't involve timekeeping. And I think for me, that's why I think sometimes time can go really slowly depending on what you're doing, but other times it seems to go much faster. But I think it's connected to which part of our brain we're using at the time. So what I would suggest you do for a practice is there's a couple of ways you can practice negative space. You could find yourself a chair or an object and try and have the light source. Remember, try and shine a light on it if you can, or put it in front of a window. Quite a good idea to turn off the lights if you want to see highlights and shadows as well. A lot of artists use what we call directional light, and that means you've got a single light source. And that means it's really obvious where the shadows are and where the highlights are. And artists need that if they're going to try and make something two-dimensional look three-dimensional in their picture. Another thing that you can do if you want a more simple, obviously the horse was quite a complicated one, and that would take me hours to do, but there's nothing to stop you doing it. Do a quick left hand sketch first, see what your left brain would do, and then turn it around and just work on it a little bit at a time, negative space after negative space. Something much simpler, and I remember I have done this exercise myself, is to draw a pair of scissors. Okay, so there's a pair of scissors. This one is a white background and you've got the positive shape of the scissors here. This one, they've actually focused on the negative spaces. They've drawn this black bit here, this bit here, and they've drawn the outside space. But you still end up with your scissors in the middle. So that's another thing that you can do. And I don't know if you've seen the ones where you cut bits out and you flip them out the way with craft paper. That's another way that you can look at positive and negative space as well. I did the exercise of drawing a pair of scissors using negative space, and it was really interesting. I can remember it was decades ago, but what I can remember is for the first time ever, I hadn't just drawn a pair of scissors, I'd drawn the actual pair of scissors that I had, and they were unique. It wasn't just a symbolic drawing of a pair of scissors. So one thing you might do is challenge yourself, take a piece of paper and draw a pair of scissors. You know, what's your stored left brain image for a pair of scissors? So just spend a couple of minutes and think, what would you draw if you draw a pair of scissors? Then you could get yourself a real pair of scissors, open it slightly and lay it on a white background, because remember, if you put things on a white background, it can help you see them more clearly, but also you can see any shadows or things as well. So lay your scissors down. Keys are another good thing. You could put a bunch of keys down, or you could crisscross some kitchen utensils. You know, you could have some ladles or just some cutlery crisscrossing each other. Now, actually, cutlery would be a good one, because I bet you a left brain drawing of a knife, a fork and a spoon would all be lined up. They'd all be in their own space, and we've got very stereotypical ideas of what forks are like. But I bet my forks in my kitchen drawer are different from the forks in your kitchen drawer, and yet our left brain symbolic pictures would all be similar. So again, we'll go back to the scissors then. This is a kind of a unique pair of scissors, and what you can do is when you're drawing it, if I just hold them up, I mean, even the way I've put them on the paper is quite left brain, right in the middle and this way up. I actually found myself, because it was like that, I wanted to turn it because I was in my head, my left brain was going, oh, they're the wrong way up. This is art, does it matter? Does it matter if it's half on the page and half off? You know, do we want to put it in a square and have bits of it missing? You know, this is the thing with art. Once you get used to overriding your left brain, that's how you can come up with so many more ideas, because we constrain ourselves with these stereotypes. So put your scissors out in front of you, but rather than drawing the scissors, draw the spaces in between. So this triangle here is quite a sharp pointed triangle. If my scissors were like that, it would be a wider, that's more of an equilateral triangle, like that. So you've got a bit of maths, you know, you could have an isosceles triangle, or you could have an equilateral triangle. Then what you could do is say, right, from the tip of this triangle shape here, so this is like a simpler version of the chair that I did. So the inside of the triangle here, from this tip of the triangle, go up, and then draw this inside shape here. It's like a little oval. And then from the tip of this one, or in fact, you could go from the top, go across a little space, up a bit, and then this is almost like a kind of a funny kidney bean shape, or a banana, isn't it? So you could draw that shape. And then from that, you can then start filling in the details. And I don't know if you can see, there's a tiny little knobble on the end of my scissors here, just where it closes. So make sure you go really slowly. You can also then start doing some of the contour drawing that we talked about last week. Go very, very slowly around and just put in tiny little lumps and bumps. What is it that makes your scissors unique? And be really, really fussy. And then what you could do is compare your drawing of your own scissors to your first left-hand drawing of what you thought a pair of scissors would look like without actually looking at them. Another exercise, which is quite good fun, and I remember again, I found this in my box to show you. So again, this was in 2010 that I did this, and I was looking at different ways of drawing at the time. And this was an exercise where you draw a bookshelf or a corner of a room. And I'm actually thinking, you know, if I was going to do it here, can you see my window ledge there in the distance? And it's got all different things on it of different levels. And you can see some of the negative spaces. Don't know if you can see here, you've got the negative space in between things, and then you've got a little space here. And if you draw, so if you draw a continuous line, I would go across, down, across, round, up, and draw just the outline. And then from that, you can then fill in all your detail. Now, the first time I did this in 2010, I can remember, this is, let me show you what I did. Okay, oh, it says by Xenia. But this was a set of shelves in the corner of my living room at the time. And what you had to do was, it was about 20-minute exercise, and you weren't allowed to draw the objects on the shelves at all, which sounds very odd. But what you had to do was follow the shape of the edge. So looking at the negative space up here, what shape was the edge of this negative space? So I tried to mostly look at the shelf while I was doing it, so try not to look at your paper. You can glance down at your paper every now and then just to see where your pencil is. But in your head, this is the kind of thing you should be saying to yourself. So along a bit, down, little V shape. This is like a tick, then it goes across a bit, then it goes down and then along at a right angle. Goes along quite a long way, and then it goes slightly up at an angle. And then there's like, oh, there's actually was a curve there. Then it goes slightly up, and you follow it along, and then, you know, for here, suddenly, you know, you go up higher, and then it comes down, and then it's tempting here. I can even remember doing this and wanting just to do kind of even like loops like this. But slow down, because these books are not all the same size. So one was a square, and then down, then there was a little gap, then there was another square, and then there was a big kind of U shape, and then a smaller one, and so on. Coming down here, this was quite interesting. That's probably the first time I'd ever drawn like a really sketchy kind of plant. But what I did was I literally didn't worry too much about individual leaves. But what I did was just try and follow my pencil around the line. And then when I had these weird lines, which looked quite odd, and down here especially, because I had some stationery on this shelf, so this whole bit down here looked really, really odd, and I had none of this stuff. So if you imagine this was just a line going up, down, across, round, but then the fun bit is you can then go back in and fill in all the details using this top line of negative space as a guideline. And it was really easy to get books that were tilting over. I mean, if I show you those books there, they look quite alive and not alive, but interesting. You know, some of them are at a slight angle, some of them are taller, some of them are shorter, some of them have got, you know, bits of writing on the stem. And I didn't do details on all of them. I just picked out a few books just to work on. The plants, again, you know, simplifying things. But even all of this, these boxes I had with things sticking out suddenly became quite easy. There I've got a pair of scissors and different things. And, you know, it was just great fun to do. So there's an idea for you. You could find a corner of a room or a bookshelf or just a bit of your bedroom or a dressing table, anything like that. But just draw what you see as the shape going along, and then fill in all the details after you've got your guidelines. So that's pretty much it for ideas for you. The other thing obviously you can do is Google negative space, and there's probably lots of tutorials out there, lots of different activities that you can find. But the thing to understand is that we are good at drawing spaces, okay? Because if I said draw me a quick left brain space, can't do it. What is that? What kind of space? We don't have any picture symbol for a space. So what happens is if you draw spaces, we tend to, your left brain just gives up and it goes, well, I don't really know what I'm doing here, so I can't draw a space. I don't have any reference for a space. So your right brain then takes over, and your right brain has good spatial awareness. And so what it does is it will go slower, and it will actually look at the shapes, these negative space shapes, and draw them more carefully and more accurately. And if you think back to my horse, you know, I could feel myself rushing, and I could feel myself going, oh, you know, especially on the mane, I even knew it wasn't what it looked like, but it was really hard to just stop myself, and especially the tail. I just wanted to just quickly put in that tail. But that was not what I was drawing. And if you think about landscapes or drawing, or if you were drawing still life, you know, like a vase of flowers or something, you're always fighting this urge to have your kind of symbolic left brain images. And actually I was watching a competition on the television recently, and it was actually in the final, and it was they were doing some portraits, and it was really obvious watching what was wrong. One of them was really struggling, and she kept looking at it and saying, there's something I can't wait, I've just not got this. And you could see she was frustrated. But what had happened was she had like a 3/4 image like this. This is the sort of angle she was looking at, about like that. But what she had done was taken the mouth, and it had got kind of dragged from here and round to the side here. So it was kind of like, and the reason that happens is because our picture image, our left brain symbolic image for a face, is face on, and the eyes are in the middle, the nose is in the middle, the mouth's in the middle, and so even when you're trying to draw a slightly different angle, your left brain is constantly trying to pull the eyes round, pull the nose round to the middle, pull the mouth round to the middle. And so once you start to understand how your brain works, it's again easier to override these tendencies. And the reason I didn't finish, I mean, that would have taken me ages, but I could completely see the difference in drawing like that or using the negative space. And this one would take much longer to do, but would give you a much more interesting result. And half the time when we think we can't draw, all that's happening is we're doing our left brain drawings, looking at them and being disappointed and thinking other people know how to do something differently. So negative space, you can do a corner of your room, you could pick a photograph of something and pick something that you would normally not draw. That's why I did that, because I can't draw horses. And I thought, but if I take my own advice, don't call it a horse. It's just a bunch of lines and shapes. And if you use the negative space to draw it, it makes it much easier. We've got scissors, kitchen utensils, keys. Another idea is trees are quite good fun to do with negative space as well. So if I show you this picture here of a tree, again, draw yourself a left brain tree. See what is your symbolic quick picture of a tree, and what you'll find is it's quite regular, because remember your left brain is logical and ordered, and we tend to draw like the trunk, and then we bring out branches, and then from that we bring out all the tiny little branches, but there's something very organized about it. Whereas in reality, a tree is much more wiggly. And a good way to get that is, can you see the lovely negative shapes here? Look at this, it's almost like a kind of a gannet head or something, isn't it? Or a bird. Can you see that? This shape here. And it almost comes to like a pointed beak. So just draw that simplified kind of bird looking up shape. And then you could draw a line down here, and then this next shape next to it is kind of like almost like a little kind of toe or something here, a little foot, isn't it? And then it comes to this big sort of area here. Then there's a teeny weeny triangle there, and then if you go up here, this is almost a square shape, isn't it? It actually goes off the top of the page. And then underneath that you've got a little, I don't know what it is, like a four-sided shape here. And then you've got another little teeny semicircle there. And so what you can do is you can build shape on shape, and trees are good actually, because unlike the horse, if you get one slightly wrong, no one will really know, because it's nobody's going to say, oh, that branch wasn't there. Whereas a horse obviously is harder, because you have to get everything in the right place. Whereas trees are a bit more forgiving. But that's another idea. Another tip you could use is, if you've got any tracing paper, what you could do is print out a photograph of a tree like that, or even do one in your own garden if you want it to be, something, or one you can see from your window. So take a photograph, print it out, and then get your tracing paper, and you could just literally, to prove to yourself how you can draw a tree without ever drawing the tree, lay your tracing paper over, and then just only let yourself, don't trace the tree, trace the spaces in between. So you're only allowed to trace the spaces, then take it away And what you should be left with is a really nice picture. It's getting a bit late here. I'll just put a light on. Let's see if I can turn that up a bit. Wait a minute. There we go. Okay, so basically practice different ways of negative space, but it's a different way of drawing, and do yourself some wee exercises, you know, with your pairs of scissors, and let me know how you get on. Google some tutorials of other ideas if you want to as well, but just this idea of drawing spaces rather than objects, it can take the terrifying nature out of some drawings. I can't, in my head, I absolutely cannot draw a horse, but if I take it down to all the spaces in between and around the horse, I can draw triangles, I can draw semicircles, I can draw little tick shapes, so I can draw shapes. And then what you can do is infill the bit that's left, and that becomes your horse, but it gives you like the kicking hoof and the kind of muddled up mane and so on, and it makes your picture much more interesting. So thank you for listening. That's negative space, and you can try various different exercises for that. On Wednesday, we're going to have a look at drawing our hands. So it would be quite good if you could prepare yourself a ground for that drawing, and I'll show you how we can use negative space for drawing a hand. Okay, and if you want to draw a quick left brain hand ready for next Wednesday after today's work, just say, right, draw a quick hand. You've got, say, 30 seconds or a minute. What would you draw? So get your left brain hand ready for next lesson, and then I'll talk you through how we can do a better drawing of a hand for that. Thank you for listening.